VITV podcast. This is a podcast that helps you grow your wealth and become financially independent. My name is Becco and my partner, Hari.
Hello.
All right, in this episode, we're going to talk about Alibaba. It's a big company. Most of you guys probably know what it is. All right, so we're going to do a deep dive into that company today. Hari, start us off with the disclaimer, please.
Yep, this is the VITV podcast. We are here for entertainment and educational purposes only. We are not financial advisors. We don't know your specific financial situation, so please consult with the appropriate advisor before making any investment decisions.
All right, before we start, when we analyze a company, we go through a checklist. Most of you guys know this, but if you guys don't, new listeners, welcome. When we go through a company, we go through a checklist, and this is a series of questions that we want to ask ourselves when we analyze a company. And if you guys want a copy of that, just email us at info@valueinvestor.org. So we're going to go through this checklist, but with a variation. This checklist is not meant to be, strict guideline. This is just a suggestion. All right, so here we go. First is Alibaba. What do they do, Hari?
Yeah, so the short of it is they're basically like the Amazon of China. So, they operate multiple businesses that sell, e-commerce in China, Southeast Asia, and Turkey. They also have a cloud business, just like Amazon's cloud services, that supplies infrastructure for their own business as well as anybody who wants to, be on their network.
Makes sense. I think I guess for me, Alibaba Singles Day. It's
Yep.
it's always a big thing. It always comes up in on the news. Okay, let's move on to the second question. Competitive advantage.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know we answer that first question with a very brief overview because we want to be as succinct as possible to kind of, make sure that we understand the case. But, Alibaba is huge, right? I mean, they're, in terms of size, they are 1.1 billion consumers globally, and 240 million of those are overseas consumers. So, and they operate in Southeast Asia, Europe, Turkey. 1.23 trillion dollars of gross market value just in China alone, and the average gross market value per consumer in China is $1,400. So this is all of as of 2021. So I think it's, their competitive advantages are obviously, they're a household name. The scale and size of their operations makes them very difficult to compete with. So, but they also have network effects because they empower, just like Amazon does, small businesses sell using their infrastructure and logistics network. You're a mom and pop small business selling, home goods or whatever. You make your items, you put them on Alibaba. You have a competitive advantage by, you don't go to somebody else because you go to Alibaba because they are more visible, more people will see your things, more people will buy your products. And then AliExpress is something you can actually use to buy stuff here in the US or Europe. And that's same thing. Small businesses want to sell. They have a global now consumer base that can purchase from AliExpress. So the competitive advantages here are I think, should be fairly obvious to everyone. They have very powerful brand moat. They have a very powerful scale that allows them to be a low cost provider that other people can't compete with. And on top of that, they have network effects, right? Because people go to their site, more of the small businesses want to sell their stuff on their site as well, right? So you're really talking about a competitive advantage that's pretty impenetrable as far as moats go, because it's not just one area that they're solid in; it's multiple areas that they have reach. So.
I think yeah. I don't think we need to spend much more time talking about the competitive advantage. It seems pretty straightforward, and like you said, you just think about Amazon and how dominant they are across multiple verticals. It's kind of the same thing over in China. with Alibaba. Can you tell us a little bit about the size here in terms of the market cap, just to get an understanding of how the big company is? Market cap, kind of top line revenue, just the ballpark.
Yeah, so they're the company itself is a $300 billion market cap. So to give you an idea of like, this is a very, very complex business. So when, I will answer this question, but just to step back a little bit here, in terms of that scale, one of the things that you need to understand is Alibaba itself is actually a company incorporated under Cayman Islands law, and they own variable interest entities (VIEs) through in China and other countries. So what you're actually purchasing is shares in this holding company that then owns subsidiaries called Taobao, Tmall, Alibaba, and 1688, which is their wholesale business. So just in terms of scale, you're talking about hundreds of $1 billion in revenue for that. And let me give you a more accurate number on the revenue side for um, for you here. But you know, $300 billion in market cap, and this is a company that's had a huge upheaval in the last 2 years because of what's been considered. Well, let me say it this way: the the Chinese economy has grown so much, and Alibaba has become such a big dominant player in their market that China itself is concerned that Alibaba controls too much, has too much power. So, um, Alibaba's revenue right now is about 700 billion renminbi, which is about a little bit over $100 billion in revenue for in dollars. Um, so that all translates into very large market cap, but also a very large amount of their goods is being transacted. Over $1.2 trillion is being transacted in the Alibaba ecosystem, of which they're taking a cut of that, which is what you see in the revenue numbers. So I mean, one company almost represents 10% of 5 to 10% of the Chinese economy. So it's a massive scale here that we're talking about.
Okay, just so that I understand the numbers, it's $100 billion in sales
Yep,
basically, and then you're talking about a company that's 300 billion in market cap. Is that right?
correct. Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, got it. Okay, and we haven't talked about this just yet, but and financial is kind of the was a trigger point, um, and I guess we could talk about that when we talk about risk. But that was what really triggered the government. I mean, we're talking about Chinese government really to crack down on big tech, and yeah, we can get into that a bit later. But that's good to know. Okay, about just to recap, $100 billion in sales and about $300 billion in market cap. Okay, great. Moving on to the next is okay. Obviously, Chinese market, huge market, and they're looks like they're expanding outside of China as well, to Turkey, and other parts of Southeast Asia, Asia, generally speaking. Okay, what is the company's long-term prospect in terms of growth runway? Like what what areas of growth can they tap into?
So let me give it to you in the company's own words. So fiscal year 2024, their goal is to facilitate $10 trillion in 10 trillion uh, yuan, which is about 1.5 trillion in US dollars consumption. So that means gross market value. So they would be taking a cut of that. So that's about a 50% growth from the current, you know, in 2024. And then by 2036, they've set out a target. So the next 15 years, serve 2 billion global customers and enable 10 million businesses to be profitable and create 100 million jobs. So obviously 15 years from now, that's it's a very long running goal. But one of the things I really like about this company is they think about the long term, and they're not thinking short term kind of things. They even have a sustainability plan to say, we want to operate for 102 years. So they were incorporated in 1999, and their thought process is, if at 102 years of life, they would be spanning 3 centuries. So they kind of talk about that in the, as a, they're thinking about the future, the long term runway. And so retail is a big part of that, but I would say the biggest part of it is actually their cloud business. So the cloud business is actually growing, upwards of 50% per year. They're the third largest cloud provider in the world and the largest in China. And so, when you think about it, retail has a fairly small margin, but cloud, like Amazon, represents an enormous high margin business for the company. And as that's growing, and you're going to probably see a business with inside of Alibaba that's probably worth 300, 400 billion just on its own in the next 4 to 5 years.
Makes sense. Yeah, the cloud business obviously huge, huge. I wonder how they got their cloud business started. Obviously, with AWS, it was kind of an internal tool that made it
Yep.
into an external tool, and then they started to sell that, and it was a big hit, and they had like 7 year advantage before anyone else really started to copy this model. I wonder, was it more like a happenstance? They saw this big boom in the U.S. market with Amazon. They sort of went ahead and copied that business model. Do you know the origin story behind this?
So they started about 5 years after Amazon. And I can't tell if they are innovating or if they're really just looking at what Amazon does and kind of follows suit.
Hmm.
I know for infrastructure that they are providing, it is a natural extension. You're going to be running, millions of servers and have to manage lots of infrastructure. It makes a lot of sense if you're running a retail business to have a large infrastructure. I mean, if you look at Walmart, before the internet, Walmart actually hooked up satellites, to so that they could keep track of store inventory and things like that, long before Amazon ever, did a lot of that stuff. So, managing logistics, managing all of that stuff requires that. But I don't know who, what originated that as part of their thing. And you mentioned Ant Financial, which is kind of like that's the unique feature that Amazon doesn't have, but it's essentially a payment network, where you can pay your friends, but you can also use it to, transact, business and do things like that. Which is now kind of been pulled away from Alibaba's control and is now under the control of the Chinese government, or increasingly under the control of the Chinese government.
Hmm.
Um, but, they seem to be very knowledgeable about logistics infrastructure, just like Amazon. Um, and in China, they're applying that more to Southeast Asia and to the Middle East, where Amazon has much lower penetration. So they understand that local region much better, I think, than Amazon does, and so they're able to compete in that place,
Hmm.
better.
Hmm. Makes sense. Um, I think it'll be. I think we definitely need to talk about the founding story of Alibaba and Jack Ma. Do you want to do that in the second episode when we talk about risk, or do you want to kind of quickly touch on him as a character?
Yeah, so he is no longer listed. Jack Ma was the founder, CEO, chairman of Alibaba for a long time, and for whatever reason, and I think a lot of this came from the Ant Financial, aspect of it. Um, they kind of got on the outs, and he was no longer, a favored in the in the Chinese Communist Party, uh, parlance, and so he disappeared for a long time, and no one really knows what happened. But he has since reappeared, but he's no longer in control of Alibaba, and I suspect he was kind of pushed aside. And if you really think about it, what his value and contribution to this organization was in the early days, now you're at such a large size and scale that it's not a company run by one guy anymore. Just like if Jeff Bezos, you know, he kind of stepped aside and Amazon is still plugging along and doing just fine. So that part doesn't concern me, but I think in the next episode we'll talk a lot about what is it that we should be worried about China's, Amazon doesn't have to worry so much about the US market breaking them up or doing that. China has a lot more control, so what would that impact be, on the economy? And then we'll talk more valuation too.
Perfect. That sounds good. I think that's kind of a perfect segment to end this episode. So Alibaba, obviously a huge company over there in China and expanding overseas. They have great business in terms of retail, but also cloud business is thriving. It's a company of $100 billion in sales. The market cap about $300 billion, and they're growing. They're growing very rapidly, and they have very long-term vision about how they want to shape the future, and the role they want to play in it. So great. Any other last thoughts before we close out the episode, Hari?
Yeah, what I would encourage people to do is, this is a very complex company. It is not something that you're going to be able to pick up the 20F, which is the equivalent of a 10K, and just kind of fully understand the business like this. It is a very challenging business to learn, to understand, and to really know. But I would still encourage people to read the annual report and kind of learn, because I think they laid out their, business case, their fundamentals pretty well. And it's worth reading because it's good to see businesses that have a long term strategy, um, and how do they plan to execute on a long term strategy. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you're almost reading like a big chunk of China's economy. So as China's economy goes, so does Alibaba, right? So you should really kind of use that as a gauge of, how other investments in China would do if you were investing in China. They'll Alibaba would be a good macro kind of trend for you to look at.
Yep. And then one last thing about that is Alibaba is listed in the U.S. exchange, so
Yes.
that's one quick way to get exposure to the Chinese market if you want. Anyway, we'll talk more about that in the next episode. Great. Thanks again for listening, and please you know at, hit that like button, whatever people say at the end.
Comment on our video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, send Becco an email, tell him to actually say at the end of a podcast because he's clearly failing at it. So, um,
Yeah, all of that above. And again, if you want a copy of the checklist, info@valueinvestor.org. Send that over. Send an email to us. We'll be happy to send you a copy. Awesome. Thanks a
all
lot,
right,
everybody. I'll see you in the next
thanks.
episode.